The recent success of the Artemis 2 mission was a long-awaited triumph for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, a governmental agency established back in 1958. NASA has been a source of inspiration for decades, showcasing the very best of humanity's ingenuity, creativity, and courage that goes above and beyond. NASA's accomplishments during the era of the Apollo program will forever be legendary, but following the end of the Space Shuttle program in July of 2011, the agency had to rely on their once arch nemesis, the Russians, to get their astronauts to the International Space Station. The collaboration with private launching companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin gave the agency another solution. But it wasn't until Artemis was announced that NASA was ready to kickstart a new era of space exploration history. Artemis 2 took humankind back to deep space, bringing Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen closer to the moon than any humans have been in the past 54 years. But we won't focus on this legendary foursome today. Instead, we go back to 1968, to the original Artemis 2 mission, the first lunar flyby. You're watching The Dig, and this is the story of the iconic Apollo 8 mission. We travel back to 1961, when the Apollo program was first announced by President John F. Kennedy. See, the 1960s were a wild time to be alive. The animosity between the Soviet Union and the United States was growing with every day, and not even space was safe from their competitive tendencies. This is why the space race took place, to see who would come on top and become the superior technological, scientific, and space power. And when JFK declared that Americans are, quote, choosing to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things not because they are easy, but because they are hard, end quote, in September of 1962, the stakes were high. The loss of the Apollo 1 crew in late January of 1967 hit the agency hard. Ed White, Gus Grissom, and Roger Chaffee tragically lost their lives during a ground test due to a fire that broke out in the crew compartment. The first crewed mission of the brand new program ended catastrophically, pushing the launch of Apollo 2, later renamed Apollo 7, by almost 2 years. Besides it being the very first time the command module and the Service Propulsion System (SPS) engine were continuously used and tested, the Apollo 7 mission went down in history as the first live television broadcast from an American spacecraft and was deemed an absolute success. In a similar fashion to NASA's first Apollo program mission, the Soviets suffered a serious blow when the Soyuz 1 mission ended tragically, killing cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov during re-entry. Despite the fact that the Soviets began focusing their space ventures more towards long-duration flights and the gradual exploitation of low Earth orbit, the fear they might beat Americans to the moon still existed, which prompted NASA to skip intermediate Earth orbit missions and go straight for lunar orbiting. Considered as one of the most important missions NASA ever conducted, Apollo 8 became a turning point in the Cold War space race. Successfully accomplishing a lunar orbit meant sending a serious message to the Soviets, and only the very best in NASA's astronaut fleet were to be chosen. Frank Borman, mission commander, also flew on Gemini 7 and gained significant experience flying aboard the fourth crewed Earth-orbiting spacecraft. At the time of his selection as commander of Apollo 8, Borman had spent 14 days in space, back then a record. A holder of a master's degree in nuclear engineering, and an astronaut responsible for dosimetry, radiation effects, and environmental controls, William A. Anders was chosen as the lunar module pilot. Anders would later be best remembered for the Earthrise photograph he took during the mission. Finally, the command module pilot and one-third of the ill-fated Apollo 13 crew, James A. Lovell became the last puzzle piece of the Apollo 8 crew. He'd later become one of the few humans that got to travel to the moon twice. The insignia of the Apollo 8 mission is quite interesting. Although most other mission patches were round, that of Apollo 8 is triangular and refers to the shape of the Apollo command module. A red figure 8 is looping around the Earth and Moon, representing both the mission number and the mission goal, orbiting around Earth's sole natural satellite. The astronaut surnames are seen at the bottom of the giant 8. Before the Fabulous 3 could take off, they needed close to a year to train for the historic mission. See, when Anders, Borman, and Lovell learned they'd fly in December of 1968, NASA was planning to conduct an Earth orbit test mission to evaluate the hardware, especially the lunar module, which wasn't used until the Apollo 9 mission in March of 1969. It's only in August of 1968 that the agency decided to switch from Earth orbiting to lunar orbiting to avoid a situation where the Soviets successfully orbited around the moon before the Americans did it. So, the crew of Apollo 8 went from preparing for an Earth orbit mission to only having 4 months to get ready for traveling farther than any man ever had before. Due to various technical issues that occurred with the Saturn V rocket during uncrewed missions of Apollo 4 and Apollo 6, the agency was unwilling to risk the lives of its astronauts, so it went back to redesign the most potent rocket ever produced. NASA successfully solved the problem of engines shutting down prematurely, the issue of violent vibrations during launch, and the difficulties the upper stage engine had with restarting in orbit, which would signify the end of the mission for a lunar flight. This is not to say that the agency knew if the changes implemented would actually work, since it decided to skip an uncrewed test and launch the Apollo 8 crew while hoping for the very best. And the very best is exactly what they got. On December 21st, 1968, Apollo 8 lifted off and marked the first crewed launch of the Saturn V rocket. The translunar injection (TLI) burn was commenced at T plus 2 hours and 27 minutes. It took the crew close to 69 hours, roughly 3 days, to reach the moon. Thankfully, due to the Saturn V rocket working perfectly following the redesign, the Apollo 8 crew had no problems reaching the moon. While traveling towards Earth's sole natural satellite, Anders, Borman, and Lovell became the first people to ever witness the whole Earth at once. The three also became the first humans to pass through the Van Allen radiation belt, a zone of energetic charged particles which mostly originate from solar wind and are captured and held around a planet by a planet's magnetosphere. To make sure the crew wouldn't be exposed to harmful doses of radiation, NASA scientists on the ground predicted that the three would likely experience no more than a chest X-ray dose of radiation, or 1 milligray, the unit of ionizing radiation dose. On Christmas Eve of 1968, Apollo 8 reached the moon. While there, the spacecraft orbited the satellite 10 times in a span of 20 hours and conducted a number of other primary mission objectives, like testing deep space navigation, communications, and tracking the performance of both the command and lunar module in lunar conditions. During the lunar orbit, the Apollo 8 crew made a Christmas Eve television broadcast where they read the first 10 verses from the book of Genesis. The Apollo 8 mission didn't become iconic just because it marked the first lunar crewed flyby, or because the cheery threesome aboard traveled farther than any other human being had until that point. William Anders made the mission absolutely unforgettable when he snapped the legendary Earthrise photograph during one of the lunar orbits. The significance of this photo came only later, when Life magazine included it in its list of the 100 most important photos of the century. However, this isn't to say that everyone enjoyed their time in lunar orbit. Commander Borman suffered from a debilitating bout of the Space Adaptation Syndrome, SAS, which significantly affects the vestibular system and oftentimes causes nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. In fact, statistics show that this special form of motion sickness affects between 70 and 73% of astronauts in the first 3 days of spaceflight. Based on research, SAS was even more pronounced aboard the Space Shuttle and Skylab, America's first space station, due to their significantly bigger size than the Apollo spacecraft and more room for movement. 2 days after Christmas, Apollo 8 successfully returned back to Earth and marked yet another big win for the 10-year-old agency. Following the splashdown and recovery, Borman, Anders, and Lovell came back to Houston to a roaring crowd that wanted to celebrate its heroes. The exceptional success of Apollo 7 and Apollo 8 came as a necessary feel-good moment at the end of an unnecessarily bloody year in U.S. history, following the tragic assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy. Indeed, Borman received a letter following his mission that read, quote, "Thank you, Apollo 8. You saved 1968," end quote. Without the extraordinary achievement of the second successful mission of the Apollo program, the July 1969 moon landing likely wouldn't have happened, at least not when it did. Not only did NASA prove its capability and technological prowess, but it sent a clear message to the Soviets. You might have won the first few battles, but the war is not over yet. As Roger Launius, former chief historian at NASA, puts it, the Apollo program created a religion of spaceflight, riddled with uncertainty, unforeseen bravery, and undeniable success that not only helped the U.S. win the space race, but it also ensured their place in the Space Hall of Fame. Although there had been a lull in NASA's activities since July of 2011, when Space Shuttle Atlantis touched down for the very last time, the historic mission of Artemis 2 seems to have reignited the world's interest and fascination with space travel. This excitement for what's to come is reminiscent of the early Space Shuttle era, which later proved to have been not only the most expensive American space program ever conducted, but also the deadliest, having claimed the lives of 14 people. Though it's been 23 years since NASA last lost astronauts in space flight, high-risk missions like those of the Artemis program will surely keep everyone at the edge of their seat. Another great era of NASA's space programs is surely before us, but remembering stories like that of Apollo 8 is a great reminder that greatness comes from small beginnings. The risk and sheer bravery of the Apollo 8 crew is visible through their legacy that lives on almost 58 years later. Flying aboard a rocket that hadn't been tested, going farther than any man had gone before, knowing they might never come back, all while carrying the hopes and dreams of an entire nation desperate to reach the moon before the Soviets, is what absolute badassery is made out of. There's no denying that every single astronaut crew to fly for NASA and other space agencies has risked their lives for the greater good, but the significance of that sacrifice in the case of the Apollo 8 crew and other crews of the program is immense. When the future of the Cold War lays on your shoulders, you go all in, no matter the cost. And that's exactly what Anders, Lovell, and Borman did. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more uncharted and niche history topics that are yet to be covered. Until next time, diggers.